All right. So let's just start with the design. So I got the inspiration for this design from Dribble. For like, before that, I'll just tell you that we'll be working on a weather app. We'll be making a proper weather app with a lot of different functionalities that would make it look like a production level application. So a few of the functionalities that will not just be making a weather app that can tell you the weather of a particular location. We'll be adding a predictive search feature. So when you type and start typing any location, you'll be getting suggestions for multiple different locations that you might want to be searching for, and you can add these multiple locations to your application, and you can view the weather for all of these separate locations, just by navigating through them by using a simple arrow based navigation. And then you'll be having these different different types of metrics that you can show on the page. And lastly, we'll also try to add a unit toggle to toggle between css and Celsius and Fahrenheit. So the inspiration for the design I got through this Dribble mockup, and I just shamelessly copied it onto a Figma dashboard and changed it a bit. So this is what we'll be making, and this is the whole project that you'll be getting at the end of these 7 days. So as you can see on the left side, you have the search bar. We'll be giving a whole day on the search bar to make the predictive search feature, and basically the auto suggest feature. And then we'll be also using an API, that is the Open Weather API. Now, many of you might already know about it, but a lot of you might not know about it. So I've just chosen an API that allows you a lot of different options and has an API key and a lot of free API requests as well. Now, if any of these terms are not familiar to you, that is totally fine. We'll be touching all of these topics later on in the upcoming days. So today we'll be basically starting with this whole design, and we'll be breaking it into pieces. So like the right of the start, you can see that there is a sidebar and there is a main content piece, and that then in the sidebar you have a very basic linear layout where everything comes one after the other, and there are a few horizontal layouts as well, like the search bar and the this bottom area, like the navigation bar, which will actually change the location. And in the main section, you have these different cards for the different metrics that we'll be showing. So I'll be sharing this link in the Notion and in the group as well. So like if you want, you can drop off the meet at this time itself, because we'll only be working on the hold on. Yeah, so we'll only be working on the static UI today. So you can, if you are confident enough, you can work on it on your own. But I'll be showing you how you can structure your how you can structure your HTML in a way that makes it easy to break it down into components later on. So like it's easy to tackle each of these different components separately. So that is something that React offers you, and I'm going to be talking about it later on. So first and foremost, let's just start with creating a folder for today's project. So I'll just call it static UI and just name it weather. And let's just open it in code, and you guys can follow along. I'll be taking breaks in between, so you guys can copy the code and follow along with me throughout the session. So let's see what we need to start with. First of all, obviously, we'll need an index.html. So create an index file, and also create a style.css for now. Now, these are only for the static UI right now, but we'll be breaking it down later on when we'll be moving on to React. What approach I'm taking today is that first we'll be working on bare bones HTML file, like a normal HTML file, and then later on we'll be copying chunks of this HTML code into a React project. So let's just start with the HTML file. So if you're using VS Code, just hit exclamation and you'll have and hit enter, and you'll have the whole boilerplate ready. So let's just see what we need to work on. I'll just close this now because it's not needed right now. So right off the bat, we see that the whole UI, first of all, is broken down into a sidebar and a main content. And then inside there, we have multiple things. So let's just start with creating this sidebar and main content. Okay. So what I'm going to do is there's this handy, first of all, for the main content, okay, so yeah. So first of all, I'll just put a div for the whole thing because I don't want to, style the body itself. So I'll just style a div element here. So instead of div, you can also call it main, and it's not at all different from div. It's just that it's a semantic tag name, which is a part of, which is a feature of HTML5. So you have multiple tag names that don't do anything, but it's just easier for us to identify them in code. So this is the whole thing. That is why I'm calling it main. And then inside there, I can write an aside for the sidebar and a section for the right part. Okay. So this is the sidebar, this is a side, and the rest of it is section. Okay. Now this thing is basically horizontally in a horizontal layout, right? So for horizontal layout, we use Flexbox. So first of all, I'll just link my style file. So uh, okay, so for this you'll use link, and for this also you have basically abbreviations that is by virtue of Emmet, it's an extension. So I'll just do this and I'll get the link rel style sheet style.css. Now I can start using and start adding styles to it. So first of all, what I'll do is, and this is what I do, this is used in almost all the pages. So for box sizing, I'll use border box. You can explore all these properties and you can search what they mean later on, but for now we'll just breeze through this part. And I'll also reset the margins for all the elements that are going to be on our website. So I'll just do a margin 0 here. uh, all right, sure, yeah, okay. So so after this, let's just save it, and I'll use an extension that's called Live Server. If you don't have it installed already, you can just go here on this, click on this button, and search Live Server. Okay, just to be a little, fluent in this, how many of you guys here are not familiar with VS Code, or are using VS Code and like getting to know all of this for the first time?
I have just started VS Code,
Okay,
C
fine.
program and Python programs.
All right, okay. So you just go to this, click on this icon, and this is the extension section. So search for Live Server and install this particular extension by Ritvik Dey. Okay, once you hit install, you'll see an install button here, and once you hit install, and after it is installed, you'll probably see a go live button here. I'm not seeing that, so what I'll do is I'll right click on the HTML file and click open with Live Server. So that will basically open this particular page in a server environment onto your browser. Okay. So once you have it there, just to test if it is working properly or not, I'll just put this side by side. And if I write something like, hey, so you'll see that it instantly updates here upon saving the page, right? So this is what we'll be working with. This is the basic stub for the whole layout. And first things first, I'll need to horizontally align it, right? So I'll just name it sidebar just to identify these. And this is the main content, okay? And then I'll go to style.css. And for the main tag here, I'll do display flex. Okay. And just with this, you'll see that these two are horizontally aligned, right? But now I'll need to see if, these I'll need to see how much area this is covering, right? So I'll just put colors on these two sections. So what I'll do is I'll do a main, I'll use a nested selector. So I'll use main aside, and I'll use a background color of red for this. And this is going to look really bad, but it tells you like if it's taking up the whole height or not. So that's what I'm going to be using it for. So as you can see, it's not taking up the whole height right now. It's just taking the height of the height and width of its content, right? So that's the second thing that we're gonna do. So for that, I'll set the parent that contains the both of these tags to a height of 100 viewport height. This is a relative unit, so it basically sets the height of this whole thing to 100% of the whole height of the viewport. That is the page that's showing the website. So now it's at 100 viewport height, and I'll also set the width for this. So I'll set the width to 100%. Like this usually covers up the whole width, but for some reason that like it's not covering the whole width of the page. So we'll just see why this is not happening. So the reason behind it is that in Flexbox, each of the elements inside the Flexbox takes up only as much width as needed by that particular element. So in here, the main content only needs this much width. That's why it's only taking this much width. But in our design, we can see that there's a lot of empty breathing area, right? Like these empty areas. So and this whole thing is also divided into a 3:5 is to 6.5 ratio. That is something that I actually did from the width here. So if you see the width, this is 504, and if you see the whole width, that is 1820 approximately. So that is around 3.5 by 6.5. So that is what I'll set here for these two sections. And how I'll do that is I'll do a flex of, and it's it's very simple. Like you'll just put a flex of 3.5, and in here you can put a flex of 6.5. So now you can see that these two are, in that particular ratio. But that is not enough for me. What I'll also do is I don't want that the sidebar becomes too small. So what I'll do is I'll do a min width, that is a minimum width, and I'll set it to some minimum value. So it doesn't go below that. So I'll just set it to 420 because that's what I feel will look good. 420 pixels. So if I go to full screen now and I start reducing the size, you'll see that after 420, it doesn't go, it doesn't reduce in size. So 420 doesn't look good. So I'll just use 360. Okay, and this is it. This is my basic layout. And like why this would work is because the cards on the right side can, go into a one column layout if the size is being reduced. Okay, but the left side will need breathing area at all times. So that's why this would work. I won't be, by the way, we won't be working on the mobile UI. That is totally up to you. Like you can look into media queries, and I'll just give you a few resources later on to, how to work with media queries and make a mobile friendly layout. But we won't be covering that today. So, yeah, after this, let's start working on the sidebar first of all. So I'll just start with each of the components. I'll go through each of the components one by one and make the UI for each of them. Okay. So let's zoom into this and see how this would be made. So again, we see that there is an icon at the start. Then there's a input box here, and then at the end there is another icon, right? So what we can do is we can use a simple div tag, and inside there we can have three separate components and align them into a flex box again. So I'll come back here, and in the sidebar I'll do div, and inside here I'll add the two SVGs. So how do we add SVGs to our project? It's very simple. You just click on the SVG. Like if you're working on any project, then you'll probably get a design from the designers. So from there, you can extract the SVG by just clicking on the SVG and hit export and go to SVG. And why we are using SVG? Because SVGs don't break upon zooming in or zooming out. So they are pixel perfect at all scale levels. So I'll just export it and import it into my project. So hold on, let me just search for it. Yep, there it is. So I'll just call it search icon. Save. Similarly, I'll also export this one and I'll call it close icon. Okay. And then we have the input box itself. So inside the div, we'll have first of all the first SVG file. So for that, I'll use the image tag. Now there's a difference between using an SVG directly or using it with an image tag. So when you're using it with an image tag, you're not able to, control the color and all of the SVG. But I really do want that I can control the color for this close button, because when the user has typed in this field, later on I would want that the close button becomes black, and if there is no text inside the field, the close button is disabled and its color is this grayish color. So what I'll do is, in order to achieve that, we can just copy the SVG and paste it directly into the HTML markup here. And similarly for the search icon also, I'll do the same. So I have the two SVGs inside, and then oh, by the way, you guys must be needing the design link for following along, right? So I'll just share it with you. Hold on. I'll just put it in the group. All right. So you guys can open that up and you can follow along with the export and all, and let me know if when I can continue with it.
Oh, just a minute.
Yeah, sure, sure. I'll just format this a little bit so it's easier to see. So once you have copied these SVGs into the HTML file, you can safely delete them, because we are not going to be using it using an image tag. We just directly copy pasted them, right? So I'm just going to be deleting these SVGs now. And let me know if I'm going too fast, or like if anything is not clear, and I'll just stop there and explain it to you. So here's a style.css and here's the HTML file. All right, shall I continue?
Yes, right.
Okay. So once you add those two SVGs, and make sure that they are in the correct order, and if they're not, you can obviously pre-order them. So in between them, I'll add the input tag, and the input tag is basically used for text-based input. So you can also write type equals to text, but the default type is anyways text, so you can leave it out, and that would also be fine. And then in the design, you can see that there's a search for places, helper tooltip, right? So that's called a placeholder. So for that, we'll use a placeholder attribute, and I'll write search for places. And let's just see how it looks on the website. So this is how it's looking right now. Now it's already into a horizontal layout, and that is because all three of these tags are, they are called inline tags. So they don't break into a new line, but we're still gonna be needing a flex box around them, because we need to align them to the center, right? Like these two icons should be at the center of center horizontally. So that's what we're gonna do now. So I'll name it something. I'll give it a class of search bar, and the search bar class in here will have a display flex again. And this time around, I'm going to be, as I said, we'll need to align them horizontally, right? So for horizontal aligning, we use align items center. Okay. By the way, in Flexbox, when you want to, Flexbox can be used to align items horizontally and vertically as well. Sometimes you need a vertical Flexbox. So the default direction in a Flexbox is a row. But if you want to change that, you can also use Flex direction. And here you will find all these different, options. So you can use row, which is the default, and you also have row reverse, column reverse, all of these options. So I'm not using it because we need a row layout only. So this is align items. So align items will basically align it horizontally, and for some reason it's not working. Okay, uh, hold on. Okay, the index file wasn't saved. So once I save it, you can see that these three items are aligned horizontally. So let's just start styling it properly according to the design. So since you guys have already opened the design, I'll just put it onto my secondary monitor. So it's easier to navigate for me. So around the search bar, you can see that there's a border, right? So for that, what we will do, we'll add a border to this whole container that contains the whole, the two icons and the input box. So I'll just, for that, I'll use border 1px solid, hold on, 1px solid, and I'll use the color that I defined in there, which is 888. So with this, I'll have a border around the whole thing. So you can see the border is appearing there, but you can also see that it is spanning the whole width of this container, right? So for that breathing area that is around the whole container, I'll put a padding around the whole thing. So I'll come back in here, and for the aside section, I'll put a padding. Now let's see what the padding is in the design. So if you want to see how much gap some element has with respect to its parent, the parent being the whichever element contains a particular element, just press Alt and you'll be able to see these different measurements. So I can see that the vertical padding here is 64 and the horizontal padding is 42. And similarly on the bottom as well, I think it would be the same. Okay, on the bottom it is 48. So that is what I'm going to put into the padding property here. So I'll just use 64px, 42px, and the bottom one was 48px, and then again 42px. These go from top, left, top, right, bottom, and then left. So in a clockwise direction. So starting from the top. So that is why I've defined these values in this particular manner. So once I do this, you'll be able to see that there's that breathing room that we were looking for. So if you open inspect element by right clicking and going into inspect, you'll be able to see that there's this icon. So you can use this to see if your measurements are if your CSS properties are working properly or not. So when I hover over it, you can see in this window, I see a padding of 64, 42, 48. And that is what we put it in, that is what we specified, right? So it's working properly. Moving on, I'll just breeze through this a little bit, and then you guys can follow along. So let's just see similarly how much padding is inside this particular container with respect to its parent. So it is 10 all around, and I think that's the same for everything. Yeah, it's 10 in here as well. So I'll just put a padding of 10 in the search bar class. So here I'll do a padding of 10px, and then you'll be able to see that padding. And there's also a border radius here because the corners of this is rounded, right? So in the search bar class, I'll see that there's the border radius is 8px. If you click on the BG here, the BG element on the sidebar. So I'll put that 8px border radius over here as well. Hold on. Okay, yeah. So I'll just do border radius 8px. You'll start seeing that border radius as well. But I'll also need to now reset the color of this whole background. So I'll just put this back to FFF. Or you can also remove it if you want. But if you notice in the design, the right side has a different color compared to the left side. The right side has a color of EA, and the left side is FFF. So that is why I specified specifically that the sidebar would be white, because now what I can do is I can go into the main tag and I can specify a background color of EA and remove this background color from the section, this section. So now you'll see that separation between the two content, right? So after that, let's start working on this whole thing. Like it's a mess right now, right? Like it doesn't look good. So let's just start working on each of those things. So hold on. Yeah. So inside the search bar, we have already specified the padding and it's 10px right here. So after that, let's start working on tidying up the input element. So the input element by default has all these like all these properties that the browser provides it to it so that it looks a little decent. So we'll just need to we don't want all of those properties. So for that I'll use all unset, and this will basically reset all of those properties, and you'll see that it is completely cleared now. Excuse me. So after that, I want the input element to take the rest of the remaining width that is present inside the search bar. Like currently you see that the rest of the remaining width here is going like unused, right? So I want that the input element takes up takes up all of the width and pushes both of these icons to the extreme ends. So for that, we can use a flex 1 on this element, and since its parent, that is the search bar, is a flex box, it will push the other elements to the extremes, and the input element will take the whole width. Okay. Now we'll also see that there's a little like margin compared to like margin or padding, whatever, like compared to the search bar over here, right? And similarly, that margin would also be there on the other side of the page, so like right here. So like when the user starts typing, so what we can do is we can specify a horizontal padding all around, like all around the input box, so that it is starting from the like after 16 pixels from the first icon. So for that, what I'll do is inside the input box, I'll provide it a padding. And if we look here, so the vertical padding is 11px. Let's just assume that it is 12px because I am a little, OCD about the numbers. There should always be a multiple of 4. It's also a UI design rule. It's called the rule of eights. So every padding or margin or spacing, it should always be a multiple of 8 or 4, and that way your UI would look consistent. Like if you're a UI designer, you should also use it. Like it's a good practice. So I'll use a vertical padding of 12 and a horizontal padding of 16 here. So for that, we can write 12px and 16px. And when we specify padding with two values only, what it does is the first value is used for vertical top and bottom padding, and the second value is used for left and right padding. So once I save it, I'll be able to see that particular padding over here. And it looks a little too much, right? So let's just see what's happening. Okay. So what's happening is that we already specified 10px padding all around the thing, and that is why the vertical padding is not just 12px, it's 12 plus 10px. So I'll just remove that 10px padding from the vertical side. So the way I'll do it is I'll specify a vertical padding of 0 here. Okay. So with that, the search bar starts looking good, right? And it is looking consistent with the UI that we had over here. And the whole thing is now looking almost similar to this. Okay. The things that if it doesn't look exactly similar to that, that is because we are not using the proper font. So let's just start with importing the particular font that I've specified here and use that like after this. So I'll just stop here and you guys can copy this part if you want. Just let me know once I can continue.
Are you sharing the font link as well?
No. We'll be doing that after, like, you guys, take write this down.
Oh, all right.
So if you guys are done, like, shall we move ahead?
I'm done with it.
All right. Okay. So one thing that I noticed right now is like the first thing is obviously font. Like we need to change the font, and the other thing that I noticed is that these icons they have the default color and like the default size that is specified from the Figma design itself, right? So if you want to change these, you can simply come over here and do a dot search bar and search. Hold on, dot search bar and SVG, and you can specify that particular height that you want and the fill color that you want for the icon. But we're gonna be doing this later on in when we enter into the React realm. So we can just skip it for now. So let's just move on to using the correct font now. So what I'll do is I'll go over to Google Fonts. Just search Google Fonts on Google and you'll find this website, and here search for that particular font. It's Nunito, and this is the font that I used. So just click on it and select all the styles that you might be needing in a website. Like a good practice is to not select everything here. Just select the bare minimum styles that you will be needing. So in my design, I've only used the regular and the semi bold, I think. But just to be safe, I'll also select the bold one here. Okay, so I'll select the regular italic, semi bold, italic, bold, and bold italic as well. And once you select all these, Google Fonts will automatically tell you how to import them into your web page and stuff. So there are multiple ways to do it. You can import them into a CSS or your HTML file. I usually do import them into my HTML file only. So I'll just copy the link code here. I'll paste this in the head of my document right here. And once I hit save, I now have those fonts, but you won't be seeing them as soon as I do that. You'll also need to specify this particular style over here. So if it lets me scroll down, yeah. So you see that there's this font family Nunito Sans Serif, right? So I'll just explain what it does, but for now I'll just specify it all over my document. So I'll just go to the all selector and paste this font family here. So this part is, it's basically a fallback. So when it finds the Nunito font family, then it will use the Nunito font family, and if it doesn't find it, it will use the next thing in the array in the list. And you can specify as many fonts here as possible. You can specify multiple fonts. You can also give Arial and so on and so forth. Okay, I'll just use the one that is suggested by Google. So once you have this, you'll see that the fonts start looking exactly similar to what we have in there. And let's just move on to the next section that we have in here. So the next section for now is basically an icon. Now currently this icon is static and it's just placed here, right? But later on, when we actually integrate the API, when we use the OpenWeather API, we're gonna be generating these icons dynamically based on the weather of the particular location. So for now, I'll just export it and I'll just use it directly in my document. So what I'll do is, you can right click over here if you don't want to export it. Excuse me. So if you don't want to export it, you just want the SVG code, you can right click over here and go to copy and copy as SVG. Okay. Once you do that, we'll come back over here. And after the search bar, I'll just paste the whole SVG. So once I do that, I can see the whole icon just like that. It's as easy as that. You'll be able to see that icon here. But you'll see that this is not centered, right? In our layout, in the design, it is centered with respect to the whole thing. So, but here it is not centered. So for easily centering any kind of block level elements, what we do is we provide it a margin of auto on the horizontal axis. So how we do that is, so let's just come down here and give it a class. I'll just give it a class. Okay, I'll give it a class of icon, or I'll do a weather icon. Weather icon. Okay, and for the weather icon class, I'll give it a margin of 0 on the vertical and auto on the horizontal. So once I do that, you'll see that it's still not centered. And why is that? Oh, again, I didn't save the index.html. So if it's hard for you to also keep saving these files again and again, you can turn on autosave over here and it will automatically save. But I won't suggest this throughout your development journey. It's just for HTML and CSS, it's good. So now it should have a margin of 0 in auto, but it's not working. And that is because SVGs are not block level elements. So you need to specify that you want this to be a block element. So I'll just do a display block. And once I do that, you'll see that it automatically got centered, right? So moving on to the next part. And let's just see if there was any margin from the top. And yeah, there was a margin of 64. So to specify a margin top of 64, I'll just do margin top 64 px, and that will shift it downwards. Now you can see that it has already started. It has already started taking up the whole screen space. So you can optimize these different values of margin and all. But I'm just going to be leaving that for now, and I'll do that later on. So moving on to the details page panel, like details section here. So the first thing that I need to show is this temperature. So for that, again, I'll just use a div. Or if you want, you can use semantic tag names here as well. So I'll use article for this because it's it's one of the important data on our page. So I'll just use article for it, and I'll paste that particular value from there. And for the class, I'll give it a class of temperature. Okay, and in here I can do temperature, and I can give it a font size of let's see, let's give it extra large. And extra large is not large enough, so let's just specify fonts in pixels now, or PTs. That is the more appropriate unit for using font size. So I'll use 96 pt, and let's just see if it looks good. Okay, that's too big, so I'll use 64 pt here. That's big as well. So let's see what fits properly. 44. Okay, yeah, this is looking good. And let's just move on to the next thing. And you can optimize all of these on your own, and it's totally fine if your design doesn't look exactly like mine or exactly like the design that I shared. But it should have all of the content that is all present on the design. So okay, I'll call it feels like, or just feels, because it's very specific. So here for the fields, I'll again specify a font size of let's see, I want this to be 18 pt, and that is looking a little too big. So I'll use 14. Let's see how 14 looks, and 14 looks fine for now. And below that we have this line, right? So you can add a similar line to this. There are multiple ways to do this, but the better way to do it is in terms of HTML, the better way to do it is using an horizontal rule tag. So you do that by using a HR element. And you must have seen that this will also work fine, but I usually put a slash at the end, and this is the newer specification of HTML. And even though in HTML this would work, but in React, when you are using these tags, this won't work. This will give you an error. So in there you have to be very specific that this is an empty tag, and you do that by adding a slash at the end. So this is the HR. And for the HR, I'll also put a class, and I'll call it separator. Okay. And for the separator, the width that I specified was, I think, 96 px. So here I'll do a width of 96 px. Okay. And let's just see how that looks. And it's looking pretty fine, except for the color, and it has a little bit of depth, right? So we can fix that. Like the depth comes from the border style inset that the browser is adding to it. Whenever you see a user agent style sheet, it is usually given by the browser. Okay, so this border style is not correct. We'll use a border style of solid. So what I'll do is I'll specify the whole thing in a shorthand, border of 1px, and yeah, border of 1px, and then you have solid and black. So now it's looking like the design. So it's separated. It has a margin of 15 from the top and 33 from the bottom. I think it got a little misplaced. It should be 16 and 32. Okay, so that's the margin that I'll be providing it over here. So I'll do a margin top of 16px and a margin bottom of 32px. Okay, there's a type over here. So once you do that, you'll be able to see that that margin is now imposed properly. Okay, moving on. And since this thing is already filling up the whole space, I'll just do a small tweak and reduce the size for this, the icon, because it's taking a lot of space over here. So I'll do that easily with coming over here and changing this to 240 and 240, and hopefully that would work. Yep, that works. Okay, I think this much space should be enough, but I'll still reduce this top, top margin. So the top margin that we specified for the weather icon was 64px, right? Let's just reduce it down to 40px, and now we have enough space to work with at the bottom. Okay, moving on. Let's see where else we can cut more space, so we can get extra space at the bottom for the extra content. So I can reduce this 64 to 48px, and that would work. So since I'm going to be using like similar equal values for top and bottom, I can remove the last two values and create this shorthand. So now we have enough room for everything. Okay. So at the bottom, let's just start with adding the rest of it. So the first thing is the date and then the description. And at the end, we'll be working on this. And this would be very similar to the search bar. So I'll just breeze through these three parts as soon as possible. Okay. And you guys can also try. And at the end, I can show my result, and you guys can see how how you did. Okay. So here, I'll write and the time. I'll put the time in a span tag. So a span tag is basically used to select sections of a longer text and do things with that particular section. So in here, I want that this whole text, the time should be in a different color. That's what I'm going to be using the span tag for. So for the time, I'll give it any value. So I'll just use 516 for now. And in here, I'll put a class of date. And similarly, below that, we can use the description, like weather description, right? So I'll write mostly cloudy. And in here, I'll put a class of description. Okay. And let's see how it looks. And it looks like the basic text that we see over here. Okay. So in the design, I see that the feels like has a smaller size than partly cloudy, and this text is a little bigger. So the order should be like this: should be smallest, then this, and then this. So that's what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna tweak the font sizes a bit, like till it starts looking right. So in the fields, I'll do it a font size of 12 pt, and then for the date, I'll give it a font size of 16 pt, or maybe 18. Let's see how 18 looks. Yeah, 18 looks fine. And for the description, I'll give it a font size of 16 pt. Okay. So now the sizes are proper. Let's just see that what's the font weight, that is whether it's bold or not. So is there anything that is bold over here? And no, there's not. Okay, so I'll just start with color, specifying the correct color for each of these. So inside the date selector, I'll select the span tag, and I'll give it a color of 888. So now that time is grayed out, and then I'll see how much margin there is between these two elements. So that's 32. So inside the description, I'll just specify a margin top of 32 px. And it's a good practice to always separate elements by that are stacked on top of each other by using margin top, because that way when that particular element is removed, the separator, that gap that it was adding to the whole layout, is also removed with it. So when the if I delete this description from over here, this margin also goes away. So the top margin is affected by only the element that is coming after it. So it's just a good practice to do this, but you can also, you know, break the rules at times if you want. So that's what I'm doing here. Like, I'm using margin top, but in here you see that I'm also specifying margin bottom in the separator section, because it is a separator that should also add the margin to the elements. Okay, so with this you'll see that, okay, so 32 looks a bit too much with respect to what the design looked like. So I'll try to visually make it look identical. So I'll just reduce the margin by half, and also reduce this margin. So instead of having the separator having separate margins for top and bottom, I'll use the same margin for top and bottom. Now it looks good. So moving on to the last part of the whole piece of the sidebar. So the location selector part. Okay. So again, the location selector has two icons and text in between, and this whole thing is horizontally laid out, right? So for that, I'll use a flexbox. I'll put a div inside there. I'll add two SVGs and a text in between, and then use display flex to horizontally align them, like I did for the search bar. So I'll add a div, and inside here I need to paste those SVGs. So I'll just copy these from here. Copy as SVG. I paste it here. And the second SVG, I'll copy as SVG. And Kunal, I think you're selecting the inside of that particular SVG. So you need to select the whole thing, that is 24 by 24, like it's a square piece. And if you're selecting the vector itself, it has a different size. So when you're sizing it in the HTML file, you need to change the values accordingly. So I'm just selecting the whole thing, the box that surrounds it as well. Okay, so I'll just add that SVG as well. Sorry. Did anyone say something? All right, so I'll just move on. Okay, so here I'll add the location. So I'll add New York, and since that particular part has a different color, so I'll add a span tag, and inside here I'll write US, and this will have a class of location. Okay, or what we want, because we want to style this whole thing, so I'll just call this whole thing location container or location wrapper, whatever you whatever you prefer. So that way I can remove this class from here, because the parent already has a class, and inside there is only a single div, right? So it's easy to select this div, because there are not multiple divs in this particular class. If there were multiple divs and I wanted to select this, then I'll have to add another class to it. So in here, I'll then do location container, and this whole thing should be horizontally aligned. So I'll do display flex, align item center, and yeah, that's it. So in here, for the SVGs, I don't need to do anything because they already have the width and all. But for this div, I need to style it so it's centered and like it covers the whole like remaining area, right? So for that, I'll again do location container and then div. And in here, I'll need to add a flex of 1. So if you go back to your page, you'll see that it's now covering the whole space, but the text is still not centered, right? So for that, what you do is you align the text to the center. So for the property for that is text align center. And now that the text is also aligned to the center. Now let's just add a font size to it. Font size. And the font size I want is 16 pt. And yeah, this looks similar to what the design has. I think this was 36 and this is also 36. So since in here we have the date as 18 pt, let's just see how 18 pt looks over here. Yeah, it looks pretty good. So so now for the span tag, I'll just copy this selector. I want to select the span tag, which is inside the which is inside the div tag, which is inside the location container class. So I'll nest these 3 like this, and then inside it, I'll specify the color of #888. And with just that, the whole this area is also done. Now these two would later on be buttons. So let's just to be on the safer side, just use buttons right off the bat. So I'll add a button over here, and I'll add a button tag over here. So inside the button tag, you specify what content you want inside the button to be. Now, in most cases, it would be a text, but here I want the SVG to be the content of the button. So that's what I've done here. Now, if you look at it, you'll see that these two are now like interactive buttons, and you can click on them. But you also need to style them. And similar to the input tag that was at the start, these buttons also get a few styles by default by the browser, which makes them look very ugly. So we'll change that by using all unset. So how we'll do that is we'll come over here, and in the location container and the button element, we'll do all unset. But I also want that these when you hover over these buttons, you have a different cursor. So I'll set a cursor of pointer over here. So when you hover over them, you'll see a different cursor. Okay. Now, since the whole style of the button was unset, they don't change in color when you hover over them, but you can also add that. So I'll just add a few properties and then I'll explain them like in a while. So first thing I'll do is transition color 200 ms and ease. Then I'll do a background color of let's see. So if the okay, so I'll just add a background color of hash okay, and inside the location container for the button, and I'm hovering over it. This is a pseudo class. This is called a pseudo selector. So you use it in special cases, and there are many other pseudo selectors. So you can see that there are many other pseudo selectors, and you can search for them over on Google, and you'll find like what each of them do. Like you don't need to know all of these. You're only going to be using a few of them most of the time, but over time you can pick these up. So the most common pseudo selectors are hover and active for hovering over an element and clicking when you're clicking an element. So when I'm hovering over the element, I don't want I want this particular color, and when I'm not hovering, I want them to be transparent. So if I save it, go back, and I hover over them, I'll see a slight shift in color. Okay, it's not properly visible on my monitor, but I think it would be visible on your system. To make it more prominent, I'll just change the color a bit, and I'll set it to AAA. So as you can see, the hover is working. So I'll just use the color that I specified earlier, and it was EA. Okay. All right. So with this, I'll also add another thing to these buttons. So inside the SVG, you'll see that the button has a specific height, right? So I want that the button is also sized equal to what the SVG size is. It's currently what it's doing is it's taking up, I think it's taking up the whole width or something. Okay, no. So it has a, so the buttons have a static height here. So I want that they don't have this static height. Like when you hover over them, you see that the height is 29.6. I want that these buttons also have the height of 24 only. So when I hover over them, they don't look like they're not centered. So what I'll do is I'll come over here and I'll hard code the height of 24px, and like when, since I'm already doing this, I'll also hard code the width of 24px. So now these buttons are centered, and that hover color is looking bad because it has a square right now. I'll just tone it down for now because it's not visible on my system. So it's a square right now. That's why it's not looking as good as it can. So what I'll do is I'll put two more properties over here. First is border radius, and the border radius would be half of the height. So I'll put 12px, and in here I'll put a padding of 4px. Let's see how this looks. Since the padding is now added inside the button, so I can increase the border radius to 20px, and it looks like a circle now. So now these buttons look like what I wanted them to. So now the last thing that remains is to put them at the bottom of the layout, right? So like for different screen, you need to think about like different, how your website would look on different screen sizes, right? So what I want that these elements, like from the start to the partly cloudy section, these would be like one after the other, but the location selector would always be at the very bottom of the sidebar. So in order to do that, I want a way to, like I want a way to push this particular element to the very bottom of the container. So the way we do it is also using flexbox, but this time we're going to be using a flex direction of column. Okay, so in order to do that, so since this whole thing is called the aside element, right? So I'll go up to the aside element, and I'll first of all, and I'll put the screen on side by side for this. So I'll first of all put a display of flex over here and see what this does. And everything's messed up because I didn't set the flex direction. So the flex direction would be column. And now it's back to how it was looking earlier, right? So now I want to push this particular thing to the very bottom. And the way we do it is by coming down to the location container, and we can specify a margin top of auto. And what this will do is it will push it to the very bottom. Now the bottom padding was a lot, and that is why it doesn't look like it did much of a difference. But if I go to different screen sizes, and you can do this by inspect element as well, just click on this button. If you go to different screen sizes, you'll see that particular location selector is always pushed to the bottom, right? Like if I go to a 4K display, you'll see that the location selector is coming at the very bottom. Now this doesn't look as appealing, but it is like it will work for now. Okay, so with this the sidebar is complete, and if you want you can play around with these padding and all. So one thing that I want to do is for the aside section, I want that the bottom padding is a little lesser than 48px. So what I'll do is I'll set it to 32px, and the left side would be 42px again. So now this looks proper, very similar to how the design was, right? Let's move on to the right section, and this won't be as tough as what the left section was. Obviously, like the card, like whatever's inside the cards would need a little bit of tweaking and like a lot of time, but we won't be covering that today, most probably, since the time, like we are already at 9 o'clock. So let's just do a basic layout of this whole thing. So at the top we have this okay, yeah, before that, like if you guys are not able to follow along, I'll just take a break here, and I'll put these two side by side. And if you want me to scroll up or down, like I can totally do that. Just let me know. And if any one of you have any questions, you can ask that as well.
What does PT mean in the font
So
size?
yeah, so PT is a dynamic unit, as I said earlier. PT means basically point values. So like PX is not, it doesn't scale with the screen size. Okay, so if you're specifying 40 px, 40 px on a small Nokia phone would take up a lot of space. But the same 40 px on a 4K screen would only would only take like a centimeter of space, right? So that doesn't scale with the screen size, and it also doesn't scale with the system zoom property. So on phones, if you go into the settings, you must have seen a zoom, in the accessibility settings, you must have seen a zoom property, right? In Windows as well, we have a scaling option inside the settings. I'll just show you that. So in display, you have the scale over here, right? So whenever you change these scale and all, the pixel value changes, but the PT value always remains constant. So if you want that the fonts on your web page always look consistent on any screen size, then you'll need to use PT only, because then it would scale with the screen size. So on a bigger screen, this font would look bigger, and on a smaller screen, this font would automatically look smaller.
But somewhere I had read that while using CSS, we have something called like logical resolution. So
Okay.
would this PT also be affected by that logical resolution of CSS?
But like, to be very honest, I haven't heard of this logical resolution thing, but I'll like read about it and I'll let you know. Like, I don't know much about it.
Yes,
But
okay.
from what I know, this works on the basis of the screen width and the screen, the actual screen dimensions and the screen resolution. So based on the screen resolution and the screen dimension, it calculates the density, like it calculates the pixel density, like behind the scenes, and then only it provides what 1 PT actually means on that particular screen. So that's how it works.
Right, right, got it.
Okay, like, did anyone miss out anything? So, like, do I need to scroll up or down anywhere? Just let me know. I can also share these files like later on like through a
Uh,
GitHub gist if you want.
just one more, the sidebar is there, right? Uh, if we
Sorry,
don't
what?
put flex, the aside,
Sidebar. Yeah.
yeah, side. If we don't put flex, and when I try to give a margin top for the location container, it didn't work.
For the location container, like, yeah. So
Yeah, we
if you
gave a
don't
margin.
put flex and you give a margin top of auto, it won't work. That is because that's how, like, first of all, CSS works in weird ways. Like it went through
Right,
so many different stages of development and different stages of changes, that it works in weird and inconsistent ways. So yeah, it should work, but it doesn't work because like normally how a website is laid out is when the display is not flex, by default it is either block or inline. Okay, so normally how a website is laid out is always laid out on top of each other. So margin top auto would not work in a display block scenario. That is because basically the browser doesn't allow it. So for using margin top auto, you would need either display flex or display grid. There has to be like a flex box around the container, then only it allows margin top.
I don't
I hope
not
that
work.
clears out. Like it's about a little inconsistency in the CSS specification as well. But just a simple rule of thumb: margin top auto only works with display flex. It doesn't work by default, like
Okay,
without the flex property.
okay, this was a big.
Yeah. There are other ways to, like align it to the very end. So instead of using margin top auto, what we could have done was we can specify an empty element over here, like empty div, okay, and we can add a class of separator, okay, and remove this margin top for now. And for this, okay, there was another separator,
Yeah,
right?
there
So
was
I'll just
another
call it spacer, okay, because what it's doing is basically providing space and it's pushing things to the extremes. So again, pushing things to the extremes. So I'll use flex one here. And again, flex one is also only usable when the parent of this whole thing is a flex box.
flex box,
So yeah, so you'll still need that display flex
display
over here.
flex, right?
Yeah, so this will also work. Like if I go back, you'll see that this is also working. There's again the space here, but this is using empty tag, and that is adding extra clutter to your HTML. So I won't recommend using this. Like I also used to use this, but adding extra clutter to your HTML is not good in terms of semantics, and like there's a lot of things in the in the background that works. So that's why like you should not add empty tags like these. So
Fair.
like any like simple like a rule of thumb, just you for any kind of visual changes, just use CSS. Don't force it by using empty HTML tags or like workarounds. Like just use CSS. There's a lot of properties, and like there is always a property to in order to achieve something that you want. So in this case, that's margin top auto.
Wonderful.
So
Even that all unset, I didn't know about that. That was
yeah,
pretty
yeah,
cool.
yeah. Okay, so like, are you guys on like up to speed with like
Yes,
whatever
bro.
I
Yeah.
wrote? Okay, okay. Like,
I,
yeah, yeah, Ritvik.
no, like I've been trying, but my signal's disrupting most of what you're showing, so I'll just have to refer to the recording again.
Okay, okay, yeah, okay, that's all right. I'll also share these two different files to GitHub gist, and I'll share the link to the gist at the end of the session. So, okay, moving on. So, as I said, we'll try to complete this basic layout. So, for like, I'll try to end at making this selector, the metric selector, then the heading, and these 6 cards into like aligning these 6 cards into a grid layout. That's where we'll end for today. So, let's just start with the selector first of all. So, like we can achieve this in many ways. For that's the first thing that you would want to know. Like if you later on when we are using JavaScript to actually make this functional, what it will basically do is when you click on F, or when you click on, like basically when you click on this whole area, it will switch from C to F and F to C. So we can do this in many different ways. Okay, you can use a toggle switch and then style it heavily, and there are multiple ways to do this. Okay, but I'll just use a very simple div and align the items inside there for now, and we'll see how we can make it better, like in terms of HTML, make it better later on. Okay, so moving on to the main content now. So it's a good practice to separate your code based on like what each of the sections are for. So what I'll do is in here I'll just add a comment for like, this was the aside section, right? So I'll do a sidebar. Okay, and similarly uh, at the bottom, now we're starting with the main content. So I'll just do main. All right. And in here, we're going to be working on the main section. So the first thing that we'll be working on is the metric selector or the unit selector, whatever you want to call it. And how we'll make this is, so yeah. So basically, there's two different elements inside this whole box, and inside each of those elements there is a text, right? So what I'll do is I'll use a span tag here. Okay, and another span tag, and for this particular part I'll use a button because later on it will actually be a button. Okay, so in here I'll add a class of unit toggle. Okay, and in here I'll start styling it. But before styling it, let's just put the content from here. So let's just copy it and paste it over here and over here as well. Change it to F and save. And for some reason, it's not coming to new line, so I'll just format it manually. Okay, so the unit toggle, inside the unit toggle is also a flex box because it's horizontally aligned. Just to be safe, I'll add align item center here as well. Okay, and finally, yeah, so the last thing that I need to do is, so I need to be sure that this div, this particular button, okay, if it's a button, it doesn't really matter because the button is anyways an inline element, but I'll still need to put it at the very end of the this main content, right? So I'll wrap this into a div again, and or I can also call this another semantic tag name, which is header. So the header is basically anything that comes at the top of a page. So the header will then get a style of display flex, and this time instead of using align items, which aligns things horizontally, I'll use justify content, which align things like vertically, like where you want that particular like where you want the all of the contents to be. So for justify content, there are multiple different values, but what I need to use is flex end, or the like there is a synonym for this that is right, or flex start and which is left. So I'll just use flex end. That will basically align it to the end of the flex box. If I go back, I'll see that this is now coming at the very extreme. And I noticed that this section didn't have any padding. I'll give it a similar padding to what I give to the side section, which was this thing, right? So I'll just copy it. So in here, I'll give it a padding of like the same padding that I gave for the side section. And now it's coming at the proper position where I want it. Next thing, again, all unset. So inside here, I'll do all unset, and be sure that you use all unset at the very start of your properties, because if you use it at anywhere in between, anything that came before it would get unset, because CSS properties are read line by line. Okay, so I'm using all unset, then I'm setting a display flex and align item center. So this is how it's looking now. Okay. Now I want that these two span elements have a little gap in between, and there are multiple ways to do this. The first thing, which is I'll need to explain something that you would want to use a lot. So whenever you encounter a new property, you would need to make sure that that property is supported by most of the major browsers. Okay, so for that, because if the browsers are not supporting your property, then that particular property would not work on that browser, and then your layout would look all wrong on that particular browser for any set of users. So in order to check this, you can use this website that's called caniuse.com. So I would want to know that can I use a gap property or not. So if I open this, I'll see that Internet Explorer doesn't support that, but who even uses Internet Explorer nowadays? So that's fine. But it shows that Opera Mini and a few mobile browsers do not support that. But I'm fine with that, so I'm going to be using this gap property. And the gap property is basically to specify a consistent gap between all the elements inside a flexbox. So in here, I'll specify a gap of, okay, let's just see how much the gap was in here. It's 32, right? But we're not following that anymore. So I'll just specify a gap of 16. And yeah, so now the gap is visible here. Okay. I also want that everything inside this particular unit toggle has a font size of 16 pt. So now they become bigger. And I want that the first span element, for now, this is just for now, I want that the first span element, or like okay, so there are multiple ways to do this again. So later on, when we are using JavaScript, actually, or more precisely when we are using React, so at that time, either of these two would be actually active, right? So for that, I'll just use a class equals to active on the degree Celsius for now. So now inside unit toggle, whichever class is active, for that we want a background color of black, and a font color of white. Okay, so let's see, and yeah, it's coming properly. So now I want this to be a proper square, and inside the square we'll have that like that particular text, right? So what I'll do is, since span is an inline element, it will only take the width of its like content, right? So I'll just change it to a div for both of these, because I want them to be a perfect square, and that means that I want to change their sizes, like width and height. So what I'll do is, inside unit toggle, for divs, I'll put a width of, let's see how much we can go for. So let's just go for 40 px, and same for height. Let's go for 40 px as well. Okay, now you see that the text inside it is not centered properly, so we can do that as well again. So since the content inside this div is not centered, what we'll use flexbox. So we'll use display flex. Okay, so there's another way to see. There are multiple ways to center an element, and this is also a running joke, and you'll see a lot of memes on it if you like seeing programming memes. So to center an element, the easiest way is flex and align items center, and justify content center. Just these three lines will center any kind of element inside its parent. Okay, but if you want an even shorter shorthand, then there is this thing. So instead of using these three, you can go for display, grid, and place items. No, place items center, and this will work as well. So this is using a grid box, and this is using a flex box. I'll talk about the grid box when I'm working on the cards later on. So I'll actually use this to center the elements. And now this is looking consistent with the UI, right? And I'll just make the corners rounded. So I'll do that by adding a border radius of 20 px. And now it's looking proper, right? Now, in the design, if you look closely, the Fahrenheit circle has a background color of white, right? But how do we select the this particular div? Because it doesn't have a class, and I don't want to add a class to it. Like, if there were multiple different items inside here, I wouldn't want to add a class to each of them, right? So, does anyone know this? Like, how do we select something that is not active?
I think in CSS the new one has like a semicolon not, sorry,
Yeah,
colon not.
yeah, exactly. So what we do is, it's actually a pseudo element. So what we do is, inside unit toggle, we do colon not active. Let's hope that this works. So okay, so yeah, all right. So let's see if this works or not. I'll just add a background color of red for now to see if this works. And yeah, this is working properly. So as you can see, I didn't specify any class or element before this pseudo element, right? I just gave a space, and that is totally fine in cases like these where you're using either not or first child, for last child. These are all different pseudo selectors, and the not pseudo selector basically can work without any preceding actual class selector or element selector or anything. So so this is basically selecting anything inside the unit toggle that is not active. Okay, so I'll give it a color of white, and I mean a background color of white and a text color of black. So now it's looking consistent. Moving on. Okay, just two things remain now. So now the heading. So what was the text again? It was today's highlights, right? I'll just copy it and I'll paste it here. And let's see how it's looking. So it's coming at the very top. I wanted to have a particular, top margin. So I'll just put a margin top of 48 px here. So I'll do a margin top of 48 px, and now looking like it has decent space. So basically, the idea behind using a lot of margin and all is that you would want your UI to be breathable enough, and like you won't want anything to be cluttered, like too much cluttered. Okay, moving on. Now let's start working on this section. So for this section, let's just see how much gap and like how much padding we want from each of the edges. So okay, I think these are not exactly consistent, but let's see what we can work with here. Okay. So I want that the cards would be in a grid layout, and they will all come up over here, and the gap in between them would can vary, but the card sizes would always be equal, and there would be no extra space over here. So we can either use Flexbox for this, or we can use grid for this. But using a Flexbox to make a grid, it doesn't really look good in most of the cases. Like when you start scaling down your UI, it doesn't look good. It starts looking really bad. So I'll just use a grid box for now, and you can try around with you can play around with Flexbox later on to obtain the same layout and see what see what I'm talking about, why it won't look good. So inside here, I'll use another section because this is a new section. This is basically a separate section for the cards. And inside here, I'll use an article tag, actually 6 of them. So, okay. And these article tags will have a certain width, a certain height, and they'll be placed in a grid, right? So I'll just add a class of metrics grid, or I'll call it stats. That's a simple name. So for the stats, first of all, I'll give a margin top, and the margin top would be of let's see, 32 px maybe. And yeah, so 32 px looks fine. And this section has padding for some reason. So let's just see where this padding is coming from. So this, if you look into the inspect element, you'll see that this padding is actually coming from the main section, because initially we didn't think of that we'll be having multiple sections, right? So I just used a element selector, but now I can see that I'm using multiple sections, so I can change. I would want to change this practice. So I'll go to the top of the this section, and I'll add a class of main content. Okay, and the padding that I specified initially in the section, I'll change it to main content as well. So you'll see now this padding from this section is gone, because this section is now there is no styles for the section element itself. Okay, so moving on, I want this to be in a grid, right? So I'll just add some random data inside the article so I can see where the articles are being placed. Okay, and then I'll start working on it. So the first thing that I would want to add is display grid, and that will automatically enable a grid layout. But now you see that there is only one column in this grid, right? So since I want 3 columns, I'll use grid template columns. That's a property. And you'll specify how much space each of those columns will take in fractions, like how much fractional space it will take. So I want each of those columns to be equal width, to be of equal width. So I'll just use 1fr, 1fr, 1fr. Okay. And now you'll see that this is into a 3x3 column. Now, there are multiple ways to achieve this. So when you're scaling down, you can either change the grid template columns property to have 2 columns or 1 column based on different media queries. Okay, and you can look into how media queries work. So basically, at different widths, you can change this particular property. So at that particular width, it will automatically change to a 2-column layout, and then to a 1-column layout for mobile screens, and so on and so forth. But there is another way to also do this, and let's see if I remember that properly or not. So grid template columns, and first of all, I'll change this with repeat 3 1 FR. So it basically means repeat 3 times the same thing, that is 1 FR. So it doesn't make any change because it's the same thing. Now in here, you can actually change this to, okay. So I think it was autofit. Hold on. Okay. I'll actually need to look into the documentation for this. So I'll just search grid autofit and min-max. And yep, this is it. So I'll just copy it blatantly and let's just see if it works or not. So I'll try to explain this. So basically, the first, parameter of this repeat function was a number, right? Like how many times I want, how many columns I actually want. And the second parameter was how much width it should take, right? So now for the width, it's taking either 250, that is the minimum width, or a maximum of 1 FR. Okay, this means that if any of the columns is lesser than 250, then it would it would shift down. Okay, it would shift down to a 2-column layout and then shift down to a 1-column layout. Okay, and similarly, if it's greater than 250, then it's fine. It can the columns can take equal width each. Okay. And the autofit is it basically means how many columns it's basically which algorithm we are using to fit these columns into a grid layout. Okay, so instead of autofit, you can also use autofill, and that works in a different way. There is a slight difference between these two, but I'm using autofit for now. Okay, so if you look at this now, so if I scale up, you'll see that these are 363 each, right? So in autofit, it's basically taking the whole width. It's prioritizing taking the whole width first of all, and then it's seeing that how many columns it can fit. So I'll use autofill actually, and see if that gives us the result that we want. Okay, it's not giving us that result, and that is because if it breaks into a 3-column layout, then each of those columns would be less than 250 px, and that is something that the browser is not allowing us to do. So I'll just reduce this to 180, and you'll see that this is now into a bigger column layout, right? So you can play around with this value until you are happy, and you'll see that now each of these are 242 each, right? And each of these are 242. And when you start scaling it down, you'll see that this is actually working fine. Okay, so I'll leave it at 200 px, and now I want a gap in between these items, and so for that I'll use a gap property. But before that, I would actually want to see that gap. So for that, I'll use stats and provide a background color to each of the articles. So the background color I want is white. So now each of these will have a background color, and at the same time, I'll also provide all the other properties that are present on this card itself. So there are only 2 properties right now. We'll actually expand into each of these cards later on. So the first property is the border radius, and the second property is a shadow. That is there's this slight shadow that's appearing under each of the cards, right? So the border radius is 16. So I'll just do a border radius of 16 px, and now each of these will have a border radius, and I'll also add a min height, and this min height is basically to to make them look appealing, because some of these cards are not exactly filling up the whole card, but I would still want that these take a particular height. So that the height that I want them to take is 320. Okay, let's not just use 320. Let's see what we can use. I'll just use 280 px for now, and it's taking up a lot of space, so that's not good. So I'll tone it down a bit, and I'll use 220 px. Now I'm happy with how each of these cards are looking. Now let's move on to adding that gap that I mentioned. So for that, again, inside a grid box also you can use gap, and I'll specify a gap of 16 px. and you'll be able to see that gap appear like consistently throughout the whole grid. But if you want different grid gaps for rows and columns, you can also do that. But for that, you'll have to use grid row gap. If I can find it. Yeah, so you'll have to use grid row gap and grid column gap. Now these properties are crossed out in VS Code, and that is because it is not supported in few of these browsers anymore. So it's also suggesting that I should use row gap now. So that's what we can use. We can use row gap or column gap if we want to specify different widths and heights for our rows and columns. So I'll actually do that just to show it to you. So instead of row gap, I'll use column gap. And in here, I'll do a column gap of, okay, let's see, 24px. And now, so you can see that between each of the columns, the gap is 24, and between each of the rows, the gap is 16. So I actually interchange these, so this should be like this. Okay. So column gap should be 16, and with that the grid is now like properly aligned and all position, and it will also work in a mobile layout when once we change this like the main aside and section layout to a column layout. It will easily work into a mobile layout as well. Okay, but I'm not going to be doing that right now. Let's just add that box shadow. That's the last piece of the puzzle for now. So in order to see the box shadow, like how much you need to add, like what property you need to add, you can either click on this and see each of the different properties, or you can directly copy the exact property that you want. So you can go into the inspect section of any particular card, and you can copy that box shadow from here. Just copy it and put it inside the article and hit save. So you'll be able to see that box shadow now, and now the cards are looking a little bit more prominent. So with that, okay, I'll just add and want that this button also has a cursor pointer because it's a button. So that's just the last thing, and I promise that's actually the last thing. Okay, so unit toggle, and here I'll do cursor pointer. So with that, our basic layout is complete, and like the session for today is also complete. I'll just leave it at this, and so you guys can take it down. And meanwhile, I'll also create that gist file that I was mentioning. If you want me to scroll, or if you have any questions, feel free to ask them.
Like make it responsive. Like all I have to do is like put a media query, and for the main, I have to put like a flex direction column.
Yes, exactly. Or what you can do is just remove the display flex property. You can use
Right,
display
that makes
unset,
sense.
and that would also work.
What would be like the appropriate?
Like I usually do display unset, and that's like that removes the whole flex box, because in a column layout you usually don't need a flex box, right? So
Right.
that's a better approach.
And usually when you put media queries, right, you put them at the exact breakpoints, or you put like close to the breakpoints.
Not exactly. So like over time you find these specific values that you prefer to use for breakpoints. So what I use is mostly so it goes something like this. So my breakpoints look like you know so the first one is 1220, and then 1024, then 960, then I think it was 720, then 640, 480, 320, and that's it. So like these are the breakpoints that I use. Like it's something that you form over time, and if you want to have a guideline for what like value you should use for media queries, you can go to Bootstrap, website. I personally don't like using Bootstrap, but the breakpoints that it provides is like pretty decent for all kinds of screens. So, and go into its documentation, go to the components, and somewhere around, okay, they keep changing it all the time, but somewhere around here you find that breakpoints.
And the container
Yeah,
section.
yeah, yeah, yeah. So if you go into the components, I think you'll see the container somewhere. Wait, hold on. I'll just search for Bootstrap and breakpoints. Yeah. So you can see these values, and you can easily use these for your media queries as well. And this is basically like it encompasses all kinds of device layouts and screen sizes. So yeah, this is a good starting point.
Priya, I have a doubt.
Okay.
Priya, you have been using SVGs in it. So, what is the importance of SVG, or is there any alternative that we can use instead of that, please? SVG.
Yeah. So the best thing, the good thing about using SVGs is that you can scale it to any size you want. So currently I'm using the size that I'm using is 24 by 24, right? So if I go back to the website, like for this image as well, like this is a pretty big image, right? And the size that I'm using is 24. It's somewhere, it was something around 320 or something, right? Yeah, it was 240. So if I want to scale it up, I can easily scale an SVG to any size and I want, and that image will not break at all. So if I save it at 180, like 1080 by 1080, or if I zoom into it, that image will always look crisp and like clear at all screen sizes, but at all zoom levels as well. But any other kind of image like a PNG would not, will start breaking. So I can show that to you as well. So if I go back to my design, and instead of exporting as SVG, I export as PNG, and I save it. I go back in here and I open this file and I start zooming. So you'll see that just with a few clicks, it starts breaking and it starts showing the pixels, right? And if I, if I export it as SVG instead and go back to the file and view it, I think this was a button for it. Hold on. Yeah. So if I view it and I start zooming, uh, and this is a very high zoom, right? But you'll still see that the edges are crystal clear, right? Because an SVG is basically called scalable vector graphics, and it uses mathematical functions to actually draw the image whenever you zoom in at any size. Okay, so it will always be crisp. So that's why we use SVG for icons and such.
Okay, Priya, thank you.
Yeah. I'll just create that GIF just now. I've just put, I've added that just for the whole session today in the group. Just can someone just let me know if it is visible or not? Like, can you open the file or not? There would be two files in that gist, and one of them would be the HTML, and the other would be CSS.
Yes, sir, both are.
Okay. So add it to the Notion as well. And does anyone have any questions? Any more questions?
Not as of now, but it did get you learn a lot of new things.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, feel free to drop your questions in the group as well. I'll be happy to answer.
Yes, definitely.
I've also added it to the Notion for future reference. So, and the Notion link is also in the description of the group, so you can access it there as well.
Where suppose say like, can you like share some resources to learn Figma as well?
For Figma, I would recommend you just go to, okay, I'll just do that all as well. You can go to YouTube's Figma channel as well. Like there is a separate channel for like that they've created for us, and there's a lot of different tutorials over there. So you can just start right off from here, and like there would be getting started with FigJam, and there are multiple playlists, and you can choose anyone, and you can start over here. That's the best place to learn Figma, and also they have the documentation there as well.
Okay, so they created their own videos to show
Yeah,
how
yeah,
to use
yeah,
it. Okay, that's great.
yeah. And like if you want to actually like see how to make UIs, then there are like many different website like many different channels for that as well. But for UIs, I would recommend that you use like try doing it by feel, like that teaches you a lot more. And try reading blogs related to UI, like if you are interested in UI UX and stuff. So two websites that I use, one is Dribble and the other one is Pinterest, like to search for inspiration and just work from that. Even for the UI that we worked on today, I just went on to Pinterest and I searched for this thing. And this was the result that came up. So yeah, that's it. So
It's
yeah,
like-
that's about it for today. And like, yeah, did you have any questions?
Yes, good. So when it comes to like UI design,
Mm-hmm.
you mentioned like something like the rule of 4 or 8.
Yeah.
Uh,
So the rule of eights is basically like I read it somewhere on a blog, and it's also something that Google uses for material design guidelines. Okay, so if you go to material.io, you'll somewhere around here you'll actually see the rule of eights. They have mentioned it somewhere. Okay, so it's basically used for spacing and padding and as such, but you can use it for border radius, you can use it for like many different things. So basically what it means is that anytime you specify a particular margin or a padding, it should always be a multiple of 4 or 8. Like it should always be a multiple of 8 basically, but at times like 8 or 16 is a bit too much, so you can use something in between, so we use 12. So basically the rule of force came out of that. So anytime you specify a margin, a padding or anything, make sure that it is a multiple of 4, and that way it starts looking a little bit consistent, and you would
Right.
not need to think a lot about like what should I give for margin, like should I give 12 or 11 or 13, what looks good. No, 11 and 13 doesn't exist for you, only 12 exists, and then 18 and 16. So
I mean,
it's yeah
it's because have you heard of Kevin Powell?
yeah, I've heard of him, huh?
Yeah, I mean few months back I saw one of his videos where he mentioned about REM and EMS.
yeah
Yeah, so since then I've started using like EMS for margin and paddings.
Mhm. And
Yes,
that's also a good practice, like using REMs and Ms. Okay, sorry to interrupt you. You can complete your question first.
yes, sir. So I mean, yeah, I was about to ask, is that a good try? You answered it before that.
Oh, okay.
Yes, yes.
Yeah,
So
so using REMs and Ms is a good practice, and that is because one M to be precise, like one REM or one M, whatever, like
16.
it's equals to 16 px, right? So if you're using half a REM, it basically means 8, or half of half a REM, that is 0.25 REM, that means that 4 px. So it's also basically following the rule of fourths, but just in a different unit. So yeah, that's why it's a good practice to use REMs. And like you'll not have to type like very big numbers, like 4 rem is what, 64 px, so you'll just
Yeah.
have to type 4 rem. That's all. That's why people use rem, but I still prefer using px and pt.
And one thing about REM is also that when it comes to margin and padding,
Mhm.
uh, he told like you usually use M's because that M takes it with respect to the parent container's font size.
Yeah. But
So
to be honest, like using margin and padding with M's is not, I don't think it's a good practice, because if you change the font size of the parent,
that's
that,
what I'm saying.
yeah, like it will break the margin and padding of the parent as well. So I don't think it's a good practice. But yeah, I mean, whatever floats your boat. Like that's what's good about front end. Like you can try different flavors and different practices and see what fits for you. So
Yep,
yeah, I
definitely.
mean, if anyone doesn't have any more questions, I think we can end here.
Yes, sir, sure.
All right then. Okay. For tomorrow, I think we're gonna be yeah. So for tomorrow, we're gonna be starting with Node.js, a little bit of Node.js for those who didn't weren't able to join Ahmed Mave's session. But so we'll basically breeze through the Node.js part, and then we'll be starting with the React folder structure and how we can move things from our HTML file that we made today over to React.
Yep, yep.
So yeah, that's it for today. And thank you everyone for coming. You guys are
I
free to
just
leave.
I just
Thank you,
wanted
Via.
to point this out that programming mean you are saying right about
Yeah.
centering a div. I think one main comment was this backend developers bringing in a whole, uh, you know, like Bootstrap or
Yeah,
Tailwind just to center a div.
yeah, yeah. Like I personally don't like Bootstrap, and the reason I like Tailwind, because Tailwind is very bare bones, like in terms of styles
Yes,
here.
yeah.
I don't like Bootstrap because when you make a website using Bootstrap, all of your websites start looking the same way. So if you want to get into front end development, like in terms of making unique user interfaces for your different projects, then Bootstrap is not the way to go, because like it will basically enforce a certain layout throughout your websites.
Yeah, I've used starting I used to use Bootstrap, but this for one project recently I switched to Tailwind.
Mhm.
It's been so much more easier. Like the customization is pretty easy with Tailwind compared to Bootstrap.
Yep, that's true. That's true.